When my daughter-in-law told me to leave, I smiled instead of crying. It wasn't because it didn't hurt, it did. But sometimes, when your heart breaks quietly, your face forgets how to show it. She said, "You're just his past, not his family." I still remember the way her voice trembled a little when she said it, as if she was trying to sound strong but couldn't hide the guilt underneath. I stood in my son's kitchen that evening, holding the dish towel I'd been using to dry the plates. The air smelled like lemon soap and the roast chicken we'd eaten for dinner. Everything looked ordinary, the kind of night where a family should be laughing in the living room, watching TV together. But there was nothing ordinary about that moment. Michael, my son, stood frozen beside her, his head down. He couldn't look at me. For a long second, no one spoke. The hum of the refrigerator was the only sound in the room. Finally, I said softly, "All right, dear. I'll pack my things in the morning." Emily, my daughter-in-law, didn't reply. She just turned away, her jaw tight. Michael whispered, "Mom, please don't make this harder." I wanted to say, "Harder for who, Michael? For me or for you?" But I didn't. I just nodded, took off my apron, and folded it neatly on the counter. That's what you do when you're a mother. You make it easier for everyone else, even when your heart is splitting in two. That night I barely slept. I sat on the edge of the guest bed, listening to the sound of the rain tapping on the window. My suitcase sat open beside me, half-packed, some clothes, a few photo frames, and a small box of old letters Michael had written when he was in college. I kept staring at those letters, running my fingers over the handwriting. Back then, he used to write, "Mom, I miss your cooking. I can't wait to come home." Now I was leaving his home. It's strange, isn't it? How life changes without any warning. One day you're the heart of the house, the one who keeps everyone fed and cared for. The next, you're standing quietly by the door, realizing you've become a guest in your own child's life. In the morning, when I came downstairs with my bag, Michael was waiting by the front door. He looked tired, guilty. "Mom, please understand," he said softly. "Emily just needs some space. She feels like I'm in the way," I finished for him. He didn't deny it. I smiled faintly. "It's okay, Michael. I understand." He stepped closer, his eyes wet. "You'll always be my mom." I wanted to believe that, but those words didn't comfort me the way he meant them to. Because sometimes being a mom doesn't mean you get to stay. So I hugged him one last time, kissed his cheek, and walked out the door. The air outside was cool. The sun was just coming up and the world looked peaceful, the way it does after a storm. But inside me everything was heavy. As I stood there on the sidewalk, watching the house where I had once been welcome, I whispered to myself, "You're just his past, not his family." I didn't know then that those words would stay with me, not as a wound, but as the beginning of something I didn't expect. A quiet journey back to love, forgiveness, and understanding. I grew up believing that family was forever. Maybe that's because of how I was raised, in a little house on the edge of Maplewood, where my mother always said, "People change, but love shouldn't." When Michael was born, that belief became my whole world. His father, Jack, passed away when Michael was only 8. After that, it was just the two of us, a team. We learned how to live again, one day at a time. Michael was a quiet boy, always curious and kind. He loved to build things, little birdhouses, model cars, anything that needed patience. And he loved our kitchen. Every Sunday morning, he'd sit at the counter while I made pancakes and coffee. He'd say, "Mom, one day I'm going to build you a big house with a porch swing." I used to laugh. "Just make sure it has a big kitchen." He did years later. When he grew up and got his first job in another town, I was proud but lonely. I'd call him every Sunday and he'd always answer, even if he was busy. Then one day he said, "Mom, there's someone I want you to meet." That someone was Emily. She was polite, beautiful, and confident. The kind of woman who looked like she knew exactly what she wanted out of life. She worked as a graphic designer back then, and she spoke fast, like she had 100 ideas in her head all the time. When I first met her, she brought me a box of chocolates and said, "I hope you like these, Mrs. Miller." I laughed. "I like anything that's sweet, dear. And call me Sarah." She smiled, but it was a careful smile. I could tell she wasn't the type to get too close too fast. Still, I tried. I told her stories about Michael's childhood, About the time he got his head stuck between the stair rails or when he painted the garage door because he thought it looked too boring. She laughed politely, but her eyes often wandered. I told myself she was just shy. When they got married a year later, I was genuinely happy for them. I remember watching Michael waiting at the altar, his hands fidgeting, his eyes bright with love. When Emily walked in, he looked at her like she was the only person in the world. That's all a mother wants. Really, to see her child loved. After the wedding, they moved into a small but beautiful 2-story house in a quiet suburb. A few months later, Michael called and said, "Mom, why don't you move in with us for a while? The house feels empty and Emily thinks it'd be nice to have family around." I hesitated. "Are you sure?" "I don't want to intrude," he said. "You could never intrude. You're my mom." So I packed my things, baked a batch of oatmeal cookies, and moved in. The first few weeks were wonderful. I cooked dinner most nights, helped around the house, and even started tending to the small garden out back. Michael seemed happy, and Emily, though quiet, was kind enough. Sometimes I'd leave little notes on the fridge. "Dinner's ready. Good luck at work," or "You two look cute this morning." Emily would smile and say thanks, but her eyes carried something else, something unspoken. One evening, I overheard her talking to Michael in the living room. "She means well, but I feel like we don't have any privacy," she said softly. "It's like we're still kids living with our parents." Michael tried to calm her. "It's not like that, Em. Mom's just helping out." "I know," she said, her voice breaking a little. "But I need space. I need this house to feel like ours." I went back to my room quietly, pretending I hadn't heard, but my chest felt tight. That night I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if maybe I'd stayed too long. Still, I told myself that every new family needs time to adjust. I tried to step back, cooked less, cleaned less, let them have their evenings alone. Sometimes when Michael came home, he'd sit by my door and say, "Hey, Mom, how was your day?" I'd smile. "Good, sweetheart." Just quiet. But little by little, the quiet started to feel heavy. Emily began working longer hours, and when she came home, she'd go straight upstairs. Michael followed her most nights. I told myself not to take it personally, but it's hard not to feel invisible in a house where you once felt needed. Then came small changes. My framed photo moved from the hallway to a shelf in my room, my favorite blanket taken off the couch. The way Emily started calling me Sarah instead of Mom, it was subtle, but it hurt. Still, I stayed kind. I made breakfast, watered the plants, smiled through the silence, because that's what mothers do. We keep showing love, even when it feels like it's not wanted anymore. Then came that evening, the one that changed everything. Dinner had been quiet. Michael had mentioned something about his work, but Emily barely responded. When she finally spoke, her voice was sharp. She said, "Michael, I can't live like this anymore." He looked confused. "Like what?" "With your mom here all the time," she said, her tone breaking. "This doesn't feel like our home. It feels like hers." My fork stopped halfway to my mouth. Michael said gently, "Emily, she's family." And then came the words that cut through me like glass. "She's your family, not mine. She's your past, not your future." The room went silent. My heartbeat echoed in my ears. I didn't say a word. I didn't need to. The silence said enough. That night I packed my bag. That was the day I realized love doesn't always look like gratitude. Sometimes it hides behind fear, behind pride, behind the desperate need to build something new. But what Emily didn't understand, and not yet, was that you can't build a future by erasing the past that made it possible. I just hoped she'd learn that before it was too late. The night I left Michael's house, the sky felt unusually still. No wind, no sound from the trees, just the echo of my own footsteps down the driveway. Michael stood by the door, not saying anything. He looked torn between two worlds, the one he came from and the one he was trying to protect. I didn't want him to choose. So I smiled, even though my heart was breaking. "I'll be fine," I said softly. "You take care of her." He nodded, eyes shining, lips trembling with words he didn't know how to say. I turned before the tears could fall and walked away. That night I stayed in a small motel on the edge of town, the kind of place that smells like old coffee and rain. I sat on the bed with my suitcase still zipped, not sure what to do next. For the first time in years, I didn't have anyone waiting for me in the next room. In the morning, I drove back to my old neighborhood. My little house, the one I'd rented out when I moved in with Michael, was still there, though the paint was peeling and the garden had grown wild. The new tenants had moved out a week earlier. It felt almost like fate. I unlocked the door and the air smelled faintly of dust and memories. The furniture was gone, but I could still see shadows of the life that once filled this space. The mark on the wall where Michael measured his height every birthday. The worn spot on the kitchen floor where I used to stand making dinner. The window that faced the sunset. I sat on the bare floor and cried, not out of anger, just loss. Loss of what was, of what I thought would always be. Over the next few weeks, I started rebuilding slowly. I bought a second-hand couch, a little dining table, some curtains with sunflowers printed on them. Each piece I added felt like reclaiming a small part of myself. My days were quiet. I'd wake up early, make a cup of coffee, and sit by the window watching the town come to life. Sometimes I'd see kids riding bikes to school, and I'd remember Michael at that age, the way he used to wave before turning the corner. He called once during the first week. "Mom, are you okay?" he asked. "I'm fine," I said. "Don't worry about me." He hesitated. "Emily feels awful. Tell her she doesn't need to," I replied. She was honest. Honesty can hurt, but it's still better than pretending. After that, the calls became less frequent. He texted every few days, small things like "good morning" or "miss you, Mom." But I could tell his heart was somewhere else. And that was okay. I wanted him to live his life. Still, there were nights when the silence pressed too hard. I'd sit in the living room with only the ticking clock for company, wondering what they were doing, whether Emily still thought of me, whether Michael ever brought my name up at dinner. Sometimes, I caught myself setting 3 plates on the table out of habit. Old habits die quietly. One Sunday I went to the farmer's market just to feel human again. I wandered between stalls, looking at fresh bread and homemade candles. An older woman selling flowers smiled and said, "You look like you could use some sunshine." She handed me a bunch of yellow tulips. "I think I could," I said, smiling for real this time. That afternoon, I put the tulips in a jar and watched how they lit up the whole kitchen. For the first time in weeks, my little house felt alive again. Months passed that way. Life settled into a rhythm, quiet, simple, steady. I joined a local book club, started volunteering at the library, even took up painting again. It wasn't the same kind of love I had in that big suburban house, but it was something warm, a peace that didn't depend on anyone else. Then one evening, while I was painting by the window, my phone rang. It was Michael. His voice sounded tired. "Mom," he said, "can we come over?" I paused, brush in hand. "Of course," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. They arrived half an hour later. Michael looked older, or maybe just more serious. Emily stood beside him, holding a small box in her hands. The moment felt heavy, but I smiled anyway. "Come in," I said, stepping aside. They sat on the couch while I made coffee. The silence between us was thick, full of everything we hadn't said. Finally, Emily spoke. "I wanted to apologize," she said quietly, "for that night, for what I said." Her eyes glistened, and I could see she meant it. "I was scared." She continued, "I thought I was losing my place in Michael's life. I didn't realize I was taking yours away." I took a slow breath. "It's all right, Emily," I said softly. "You were trying to build your home. I understand that," she shook her head. "But I broke something I didn't know how to fix." Michael reached for my hand. "We miss you, Mom. The house doesn't feel the same." For a moment, everything inside me wanted to run back, to fill that empty kitchen with warmth again, to hear his voice echo through the hallway. But I knew I couldn't, not yet. "I'll always be here," I said. "But some things need space to heal. Maybe this is your time to grow together. I don't want to be in the way of that." Emily nodded slowly, tears falling freely now. "I just want you to know your family," she said. "You always were," and for the first time, I believed her. We sat together that night for a long time. 3 people, bound not by perfection but by love that had survived honesty, distance, and time. After that night, I slept better than I had in months. It wasn't because everything was fixed and far from it, but because something had finally settled. The weight of unsaid things had been lifted, replaced by something gentler. The next few weeks went by quietly. Michael started calling more often again, sometimes just to tell me about work or ask for one of my old recipes. Emily even texted me once in a while, photos of the garden or the new curtains she'd picked for the living room. It wasn't much, but it was something real. A soft beginning. Then, one Saturday morning, there was a knock at my door. When I opened it, Michael stood there holding a big cardboard box. He grinned. "I brought you something," I laughed. "You didn't have to bring anything." "You know I don't need more stuff." He shook his head. "You'll want this." Inside the box was a set of framed photos. Family pictures. Some from his childhood, some recent. Even a few of Emily and me in the garden from before things went wrong. At the very bottom was a new one. Michael and Emily standing on their porch holding a small blackboard that read, "Coming soon, Baby Miller." I looked up at him, speechless. His eyes sparkled. "You're going to be a grandmother." The world went still for a moment, and then everything inside me melted. I laughed and cried all at once, pulling him into a hug so tight he could barely breathe. "I'm so happy for you," I whispered. "For both of you." Emily stepped forward from the car, her hands resting over her belly. "I wanted to tell you myself," she said softly. "I just didn't know how." Tears welled up again, but this time they were full of joy. "I'm glad you're here," I said. "I'm really glad." That afternoon we sat in the kitchen drinking tea, just talking. Emily told me how scared she'd been about the pregnancy, how she'd been worried she wouldn't be a good mother. "I never really had an example," she admitted. "My mom wasn't around much." I reached across the table and took her hand. "You'll be fine," I said. "You already care, that's more than enough." From that day on, something shifted between us. She started calling me more often, asking for advice on little things. Baby clothes, meals, nursery colors. I didn't push. I just listened and answered when she asked. When her baby shower came around, she insisted I sit beside her. I watched her unwrap tiny onesies and soft blankets, her face glowing with a light I hadn't seen before. At one point, she turned to me and whispered, "Thank you for coming." Me to read her a story before I leave. She'll climb onto my lap holding her favorite book and say, "Grandma, this one." And every time I think about how life circles back, how once I held her father the same way, reading to him in a small house that smelled of coffee and rain. One evening, after Lily had fallen asleep, Emily and I sat together on the porch. The air was cool, the sky painted in shades of orange and pink. I smiled. There's nowhere else I'd rather be. Michael stood behind us, snapping pictures, laughing quietly to himself. And for a moment, the world felt right again. The baby arrived on a cold November night. Michael called me around 3 a.m. "She's here," he said breathlessly. "A little girl." I could hear the wonder in his voice. "What's her name?" I asked. "Lily," he said softly. Emily chose it. Lily. The name fit perfectly, delicate, full of life. When I visited the next morning, Emily was lying in bed, pale but smiling. The baby was sleeping beside her, tiny fingers curled like petals. I stood there quietly, afraid to move, afraid to break the moment. Emily looked up and whispered, "Do you want to hold her?" I hesitated. "Are you sure?" She nodded. She should know her grandmother. I took Lily into my arms. She was warm and light, smelling of milk and innocence. Her little eyes blinked open for just a second, and I swear she smiled. Something inside me healed in that moment. Something I didn't even realize was still broken. Michael placed a hand on my shoulder. "She looks like you," he said quietly. I laughed through the tears. "Poor thing," Emily chuckled softly. "No, she's lucky. We stayed like that for a long while, just 3 generations of love, no bitterness, no distance. It felt like time itself had paused to let us breathe. Over the next few months, I became a regular visitor at their home again. But this time, it was different. Emily made sure I had a seat at the table, always saving me a cup of tea, always asking about my day. We found our rhythm, one gentle step at a time. Sometimes when Lily napped, Emily and I would sit together, folding baby clothes or talking about life. She once said quietly, "I used to think family meant control, like I had to choose one version of it. But now I see it's bigger than that. It can hold more than I thought." I smiled. "That's what love does. It grows when you let it," she nodded, eyes glistening. "You were right all along." I didn't say anything. I just reached over and squeezed her hand. That was enough. As Lily grew, I found myself rediscovering pieces of joy I'd forgotten. The smell of baby lotion, the sound of soft laughter echoing down a hallway, the way tiny hands reach for yours without hesitation. And every time Emily called me Mom, it felt new again, like forgiveness made real. One evening, as I was leaving their house, Michael walked me to the door. The porch light cast a warm glow over the steps. He said, "You know, I still think about that night when Emily said what she did." I looked at him quietly. "She hates remembering it," he went on. "But maybe we needed to break a little to understand what family really means." I nodded. "Sometimes love grows best after it's been tested." He smiled softly. "Thanks for never giving up on us." I brushed a strand of his hair back just like I used to when he was little. "You're my son," I said. "There's no giving up on that." That night as I drove home, I felt something I hadn't in a long time. Peace. The kind that doesn't come from everything being perfect, but from knowing you've done what your heart could. The house didn't feel empty anymore. It felt like mine again, full of quiet but not loneliness. And in that stillness, I realized something simple and true. Family isn't about who lives under one roof. It's about who keeps a light on for you, no matter how long it takes to come home. Time has a strange way of softening things. The edges of pain become smoother, the sharpness of memory fades, and what's left behind is a kind of gentle truth, the kind that doesn't hurt anymore. It's been almost 4 years since that night, the night I packed my bag and walked out of Michael's house. If someone had told me back then that one day I'd sit at their kitchen table again, surrounded by laughter and the smell of apple pie, I wouldn't have believed them. But life surprises you in quiet ways. Lily just turned 3 last week. She runs everywhere now, a bundle of curiosity and light. When she laughs, it fills the room like sunshine after rain. She has her father's eyes and her mother's stubbornness, and somehow she has my smile. Every Sunday I visit them. It's our little tradition. Pancakes, coffee, and a walk to the park if the weather's kind. Michael usually flips the pancakes and they still come out uneven just like mine used to. Emily teases him for burning the edges and he laughs, brushing her off with the same boyish grin he's had since he was 10. Sometimes I sit quietly at the table, just watching them. The way they move around each other, the way they've learned to speak with small gestures. A hand on a shoulder, a glance, a shared smile. That's what love looks like when it matures. Not perfect. Just real. Lily always wants. She looked out at the yard and said softly, "You know, sometimes I still think about that day." The things I said I didn't interrupt. I just listened. She went on. "I used to think love was something you protected by keeping others out. But you taught me it's something you build by letting others in." I smiled. "You learned that on your own, Emily. I just waited long enough for you to see it." She laughed through tears. "You're too kind." "No," I said quietly. "I just understand. I was young once too." We sat there for a long time, the crickets singing in the distance, the porch light glowing softly beside us. It was the kind of silence that didn't need filling, warm, forgiving, whole. When I drove home that night, I took the long way through town. The same streets I used to walk when Michael was little, the bakery where we bought birthday cakes, the school where I watched him play baseball, the park bench where I sat after Jack died, wondering how I'd raise our son alone, and I realized all of it had led here. Every joy, every ache, every goodbye, they had all carved the shape of who I'd become. I thought about Emily's words on how love grows when you let others in. Maybe that's what being a mother really means. Not holding on forever, but teaching your child how to love, and then stepping back to let them do it in their own way. I pulled into my driveway just as the first stars appeared. The house was quiet, but it didn't feel empty. On the wall above the mantel, I'd hung one of Michael's framed photos, me holding Lily in my arms the day she was born. Every time I look at it, I remember that love doesn't disappear when people change. It just takes new shapes. Sometimes it looks like distance. Sometimes it looks like silence. And sometimes, if you're patient, it comes back to you as laughter, as forgiveness, as a tiny child saying, "Grandma, read me one more." That night, before bed, I stood by the window watching the lights of the town flicker below. For years I'd believed that love had left me, that I was part of someone's past. But standing there, I finally understood. You're never someone's past when you've loved them truthfully. You just become a quieter part of their present, the steady heartbeat that reminds them where they came from. And maybe that's enough. Maybe that's what family really is. Not the people who stay in your house, but the ones who stay in your heart. The next morning, I woke up early and made pancakes. 2 plates, out of habit. One for me and one I left by the window for no one in particular. The sunlight touched both, golden and gentle, and as I took my first bite, I smiled. Because sometimes love doesn't need to be spoken. Sometimes it just lingers. In the warmth of a home, the sound of laughter, and the quiet knowing that after everything, you were never really alone.